Our topic today is the construction begins while opposition gets worse. Nehemiah chapter 3 verse 1. Even though we're covering a lot of territory today to 4:6, we are not going to be going verse by verse in chapter 3 because it lists a lot of names and where they did their construction at around the wall. We'll mention some of that, but we aren't going to try to deal with all those names. But there's two ways to tell the story of Nehemiah chapter 3 to 4:6. One is prophetically, and the other is historically. Prophetically is a great chapter of every person who contributes will get a reward in heaven. And how do we know that? Because after he names all these names and what they did, in the Book of Psalms it says this: So unto thee, O Lord, belongeth mercy, for thou renderest to every man according to his work. Nehemiah was very careful to list all the different people who were involved in, not when I say all, different groups of people who were involved in reconstruction of the wall. And they all are going to have a reward for that. There are some people who teach the 12 gates of Jerusalem as a living panorama of God's history with man. And I read two different accounts on this, and my personal opinion, I think it stretches beyond reason. And we'll leave this to others. Good people have done this. If you want to read this, one of the best ones on this is the book on Ezra and Nehemiah by Harry Ironsides. He takes in chapter 3 and just expands these 12 gates prophetically. And even he admits sometimes in there, this is just his opinion. Not that I'm not familiar with it, it's that I don't want to take the time to preach speculation when a lot of it is speculation. There is one gate mentioned in Scripture that's for sure, though. Excuse me. Ezekiel chapter 44, 1-3. Then he brought me, this is Ezekiel now, not Nehemiah, brought me back to the way of the gate of the outward sanctuary, which looked toward the east, and it was shut. Then said the Lord unto me, This gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened, and no man shall enter in by it, because the Lord, the God of Israel, hath entered in by it, therefore it shall be shut. It is for the prince, he shall sit in it to eat bread before the Lord. He shall enter by the way of the porch of the gate, and shall go out by the way of the same. This is talking about the Lord Jesus Christ. At the Last Supper, as he established the communion table for the church, he said, I will no more eat of this until I eat it with you in the kingdom. He's going to sit down on the porch and he's going to eat with him right there. That's where it's at. And that gate that he's talking about has been shut until that time happens. In an earlier message, we looked at the city of Jerusalem and showed how the gates went all the way around the city. And we divided at that time down here and looked at how Nehemiah took his walk around and then he went back in and down here. Excuse me. This morning what we're going to do is we want to look up here at the upper half, because here's the eastern gate. Now what Ezekiel is talking about is this area right in here. That there, at the temple, the sanctuary, there is a gate that is by the eastern gate, and historically that gate has been closed, locked up. No one can get into that gate. But prophetically, he's not talking particularly about the eastern gate. He's talking about the gate or the door into the temple on the eastern side, which would put it near the eastern gate. The workforce historically worked in different sections all at the same time. Now, as you go through chapter 3, it'll tell so-and-so, and he went from such and such a point to such and such a point, and he was the leader of such and such a group of people, or he was the governor of this, or he was that, or whatever. There's 42 different work groups by name. Now, there actually was 43 work groups, but one of them is named twice. We'll look at that in a minute. But there's 42 different work groups that were all working at the same time, all the way around the city of Jerusalem, where the wall had been torn down and the gates had been burned, and as they worked on these different sections, it was all at the same time. Some special notes. Chapter 3, verse 1. It was not beyond the high priest to also work. The high priest was the first one mentioned to work, and he started an area, and it works around the city, as Nehemiah explained. We come to chapter 3, verse 5. It's interesting because the Techites repaired, but notice this, their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord. How interesting that he should use the term neck. Do you realize that we all talking about strong back, but you can have a strong back, but your next week it's not going to work. And throughout the scriptures when it talks about this, they are talking about these muscles in the back of the neck, the top of the back, where the loads are. In the Oriental custom, people, when they carried loads, they would put them on their head and carry them, which meant that we developed backpacks. We kind of try to use different muscles than they did. But this really says that the work they were doing, trying to lift these heavy stones and put them back in place, was using their neck muscles. And the nobles, whatever reason it was, they decided they were too good to do the menial things. To them it was menial to pick these stones up and place them back in place. In verse 12 of chapter 3, talks about the man there. His daughters also helped. Now they must have been some physically strong girls to step up and do a man's job, if it was a man's job. But you see, the nobles, they thought, no, not me. But the lady said, let's do it. It protects us as well. In verse 17, we find that the Levites also had a section of the wall they built. It wasn't just the high priest, it was every priest involved there. They were involved physically in the reconstruction of the walls. Then in verse 27 we find the Techites. I mentioned this earlier. Techites, they repaired another place. They did double labor, even though the nobles weren't going to work. Sometimes I find there are people who have to do twice the job because somebody thinks it's too under their level, right? in verse 32, we find the goldsmiths and the merchants also were involved. Hey, we run a business, we can't do that. No, they closed their business and they went out there and took their turn working there. Goldsmiths were those people who worked with gold and actually became wealthy because of the wealthy and the merchants. They got involved. It was just those people who thought they were so good. It was below them to do it. That didn't do the work. But you see, the opposition got worse as the work progressed. In 2:10, we find that, remember that Nehemiah said that Sanballat was enraged. Rah! He was angry. Then in 2:19, he became ridiculed. He laughed people to scorn. And now in 4:1, we see the rage turn into wrath and raunchy mockery. I think sometimes, again, as I said before, the Bible always understates what's said. Particularly when bad people make their comments. And when it talks about laughing them to scorn and mocking them in derision. These ungodly people have all kinds of ungodly things to say about the godly people. They still do. As we get farther in the book of Nehemiah, you see that it's just getting started. They're going to have even worse problems. Don't think for 1 minute because you're a Christian, you're not going to face opposition. Harry Ironside, in his book, says this about the work which was so precious in the eyes of the Lord was but a theme of mockery and scorn in the minds of mixed people, whose overtures of participation on common ground had been refused. I will help you. Oh yeah, they wanted to help destroy things. They didn't want to help build. They wanted to make sure it didn't happen. If you ever run into people who decided they wanted to help you do something for the Lord, and we call them accident prone, anything they do, put the work farther behind. Sometimes it's better to say, hey, don't help. Not helping is better than helping. Derek Kidner, in his book on Nehemiah, says this: Sanballat's anger showed he was more disturbed than he would admit. You want to read a great commentary? Kidner's commentaries are fantastic. Maybe a little deep in places, but they are fantastic. Over in the book of Psalms, chapter 83, verses 2 to 5, it talks about the attitude and actions of God's enemies. No matter where they were, what time it was, it talks about their attitude. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consoled against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have counseled together with one consent. They are confederated against thee. That sounds just like all the nations that surround Israel today, doesn't it? They still, their desire is to destroy Israel as a nation, that they would be no more remembered. That's what God said. He said they will always be the apple of his eye. The end of that psalm says this, after the prayer about dealing with God's enemies, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth. We looked at this term early on. When he prayed to the God of heaven, it was to Jehovah Elohim, that they may know that he is Jehovah Elohim, the Most High over all the earth. But we find an interesting thing here that in chapter 4, verse 6, says, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height. For the people worked with all their hearts. They put their neck into it, they put their back into it, they put their heart into it. They strengthened their hands for it. They, regardless of the opposition, kept on keeping on. Well, what would be half the size of the wall? This may fascinate you, since we, in our day, were having arguments about a wall on our border. The wall was 2.5 miles long, or surrounding what was then Jerusalem, from all the way around. We've seen in the pictures we've seen already. Half the height was 19.5 feet high. Almost twice the distance of the basketball basket. It was twice that. And I don't care how high our basketball players can jump. They're not going to get up to 19.5 feet. And that's only half the distance up. You saw those big rocks before. And as they were laid in place, it was 8.2 feet wide. That's wide enough for two cars to pass on. Because most cars are just a little bit under 4 feet wide. And if you use some of the smaller cars we had, they could even race around that wall. You know, those that got kind of passed carefully, but the smaller cars could race past there. This is half the size of the wall. Now the thing is that the width would have been the same width, because if they built this up to 19 feet high, they're going to build another 19 feet above that as they continue building. But they got it halfway done. How about us? Will we keep on keeping on? Is the job only half done? Do we have a mind to work? Have we strengthened our hands to do that which God has called us to do? 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 13 says, But ye, brethren, be not weary in well-doing. There are times, I think sometimes, that I just can't do anymore. And yet, you see, let us, Galatians 6:9, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season, it may not be the due season yet, but keep on keeping on. We shall reap if we faint not. As our days, so God has given us strength. If you fall in bed at night and you have energy left, you haven't really done what God wants you to do that day. If you fall in bed and you feel disappointed that things haven't just been right, maybe it's the things that aren't right, maybe it's you that's not right. Because he tells us that not be weary. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings. They shall run and not be weary. Shall walk and not faint. No matter what God has placed upon you, he will give you the strength for the day to do it. And when you fall in bed at night, you ought to rejoice the very fact that God gave you this day to do that which you could do to his glory and not to your own. Next time we get together, we're going to be having a message on defense and prayer go together. Defense is keeping your wits about you, while everybody else is losing their mind. You know what the will of the Lord is, and you pray and you let God work through you to His glory and His praise.